Okay. So you don't have Americans that come to to volunteer for other militaries. It just doesn't happen. And you could say, well, the only reason why they're coming to volunteer for the military is because, or do national service, is because they're Jewish and it's Israel and Israel's the Jewish home. And that might be true, but Mexican Americans are still not volunteering for the Mexican army, right? It doesn't make a difference. That's it. And that's the whole point of the U.S.-Israel relationship. The whole point of the U.S.-Israel relationship is that it's unique. It's unique because America and Israel share values. So it makes perfect sense for an American teenager to volunteer. Now, by the way, you should know there are tons of Christians who volunteer in Israel every year also. They don't join the military and they don't do national service, but they help with farming and they help with other things. And that's exactly the point, because the reason why they're doing it is because they're saying that like our two countries are so similar that when it comes to like the values that we hold, so we want to hold by the exact same values, and therefore it makes perfect sense for us to come to Israel, right? And not volunteer in America, right? You don't have very few people that volunteer for national service in the United States, right? People that volunteer for the military are incredibly unique. And people that do like the Peace Corps or something else like that, also very unique, very small percentage of the population. I would say it's probably under 1% of the entire American population that takes off a couple of years of their lives. And here you have people, if you're joining the military, you're literally risking your life, right? You're putting your life on the line for what you believe, which is tremendous courage. And if you're doing national service, so that like Israel has a national service component. Like I have 3 daughters over the age of 18. One's doing national service now, and the other 2, after they graduated high school, they didn't go right to college. What they did was they took off 2 years of their lives. One worked in the Prime Minister's office, in the press office, volunteering, right? And the other one worked in a school for like really like students that are challenged financially and socially in like the worst part of Tel Aviv. And then the second year, she worked with an institution that helps American students here in Israel. So, and then my daughter now is working with special needs adults, right? Which is, and hundreds of them in one facility in Jerusalem. So, like that national service regimen, when you take off a year of your life to do national service, that doesn't help with your career. It doesn't help with like, you're not making money, it's not, so it's not financially good. It doesn't help you get into a better university. It has absolutely no benefit to you except for you as growth as a human being, right? That it does do. So when Americans do that, all the more so how special it is. But those people are also very, very lonely because they're away from their families. So it makes them a lone soldier. They're away from their families. They might have an uncle and aunt in Israel, but it's not the same as having your family. That's not the same. So, and it's not just that they're alone, but everybody in their unit, everyone they're around is not alone. They are all with people that are just like them. Israelis are just like them, right? So they get to go home. Like, well, everybody in their unit goes home. They do their laundry. They go to their parents, their bedroom for Shabbat, right? And they get a Shabbat off. They go back to an empty apartment. Now they might go to someone like my house or someone that they know, but it's not the same as going home. You're never home. You get to go see your parents once a year. And then when Thanksgiving happens, so let's take Israel Independence Day, right? And let's say they don't allow your unit to go home. You're on duty, you're on base, and you have to stay there, right? So let's imagine you get stuck on base, it stinks, your whole unit's upset. Everybody's in the same boat. But when it comes to Thanksgiving, no Israeli knows what Thanksgiving is. They don't know. Like I have like coworkers who are Israeli, and I'm like talking to them, and they're like, how does the turkey fit in? And I'm like, no, turkey's really important. Like, we'll just get chicken. Like, no, you can't get chicken. But they're both birds. I'm like, yes, I understand that they're both birds, but they're very, very different, And you try to explain, you cannot explain that. You just can't. It doesn't make a difference how articulate you are. It doesn't make a difference how much of the history you go into the day. You don't get it. So if you're an American, your whole family is sitting at home. Everybody's getting together, right? Everybody's off, and you're stuck with your unit, and you're like trying to explain to your buddies, look, my whole family's together. Why? Because it's Thanksgiving. It's Thursday. Yeah, I know it's there. This is the last Thursday of November, and like we get together for Thanksgiving. Were your parents pilgrims? no one in my family was a pilgrim. Like, we came over in the 1900s. Like, okay, so what does it have to do with you? Like, no, it's about giving thanks. Thanks to who? It's not the point. Like, you just like, and you're watching football. Yeah. Is it your team that's playing? No. So, like, what do you care? Like, you try to explain this to anyone in a logical fashion. Well, but you're incredibly depressed. So they had a dinner for lone soldiers in Israel, and it was very nice. And lone sir and so it was very nice. Geller and I were both there, and it was really, really nice. So that's our Thanksgiving. I'm trying to cheer people up, and I had a soldier at my house on Shabbat, and he was not let go. He had a letter from the army to his commanding officer saying that the letter says, you will not understand what this is all about, but you must let your soldier go because it's an American holiday and he has to go. And his commanding soldier is like, no, you're not getting off for an American holiday. You're in the Israeli army now. And he's like, but I have a letter from your commander that says you need to let me go. And he's like, I don't care. I'm ignoring the order. I'm not letting you go. That doesn't make any sense. And he wasn't allowed out. That was tremendously depressing for him. So that's the story. In any case, so yeah, that's the story. Okay, let's go on like this. Let me ask you this question. You ready? Jewish rights to the land of Israel. Okay, now for argument's sake, what we're going to describe the land of Israel as, because that's obviously everything's debatable. We're going to describe the land of Israel as any landmass between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. That's what we talk about the land of Israel, right? And our opponents in this area, the Palestinians, claim that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, right? They call that Palestine, okay? So that's over, for argument's sake, we're all going to say, if you would ask anybody in 1947, you go up to a Jew in 1947 and say, what does Eretz Yisrael look like? What does the land of Israel look like? They would tell you from the Jordan River to the sea. Some people might go into Jordan a little and say that some of Jordan is part of Eretz Yisrael, but for argument's sake, let's just say from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. And if you would ask an Arab that lived in Israel at the time, right, or Palestine at the time, what constitutes Palestine, they would give you the same borders. And if you go to any map in any Israeli school today, you will see the map of Israel is from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, even though that's not the state of Israel legally. And if you go into any Palestinian village, you will see a map, not of the West Bank and Gaza called Palestine. You will see it from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. So the only people that would explain to you that the borders are from like, say, the green line of the West Bank to the Mediterranean are like Americans who still believe in the two-state solution, right? But nobody here, does not make a difference how left, how right you are. Nobody has a map that's of the two-state solution and say, here are our total and complete aspirations. So my question to you, Sarah, Jordan, Shlomo, and Shlomi and Jacob, if somebody comes to you and say, like, well, what right do you have to that land? Arabs have been living in that land for hundreds of years, right? Jews were, for argument's sake, not really there. Hey, there was some Jews, token amount of Jews that were there, but Jews were not there for thousands of years. How would you answer that question? What would you say? Don't all talk at once. It's hard to hear you if you're all talking at once. You gotta take your patience, take your turn. Everybody one at a time. This is like the heart of all of like the Israel, right? This comes down to everything you talk about Israel. This is it. This is what it comes down to, that we have a right to the land. Once we say we don't have a right to the land, right? Once we can't articulate this, then the argument's over, game's over. Right? Because nothing else matters, right? Then we're done. Because let me ask you this: why can't we just turn this landmass into the United States of America? Anyone who lives here becomes a citizen and gets, I don't mean like literally the United States of America, I mean like a country like America. Whatever it's called, it's called. Let's leave names out of it for now. But everybody gets one vote, and everybody gets a vote on that vote. Everybody has one vote, and whatever policies we have, separation of church and state, it's not going to be Jewish, it's not going to be Arab, it's just going to be a country where everybody gets treated equally, everybody has equal rights, everybody can determine their own future based on majority vote. And we'll have a constitution that doesn't allow it to become a Jewish state and doesn't allow it to become an Arab state. What's your problem with that?
Yeah, Jews wouldn't want that, obviously, because there aren't enough Jews to actually control that. Like very clearly.
We have a constitution, And the Constitution
Mhm.
states that you cannot, you cannot void the Constitution ever. That's it. There's certain basic rights that, and this is the makeup of the country, and you cannot void it. You void that, you're essentially staging a coup, right? You're just destroying the country. Okay.
Yeah, but I kind of feel like if that happens and all of a sudden everyone is given like this equal representation as a citizen, that the Jews inside of Israel wouldn't be very happy with that, because the Arabs would eventually outnumber them. Like, it wouldn't become a Jewish state, right?
No, we're getting, it's not a Jewish state. We are ideally getting rid of the concept of a Jewish state. Bless you, Jordan. A Jewish state, okay, a Jewish state is only a Jewish state because the idea was that Jews have a right to be there, right? You can't make it a Jewish state if Jews don't have a right to be there. Then everyone's going to turn around and be like, why are we here? And everyone else is going to turn, why are you here? It's a Jewish state.
The most recent time there was a national list, let's say, a nationally desiring nation within the land of Israel, or Palestine, if you want to call it, was in the 1880s. That was when the first Jews and the first elite were coming over. At that time, the people that we call Palestinians did not identify that term. There are more Syrians, Arabs, just generally people that lived there, and the boonies of the Ottoman Empire. The Jews that lived there at that time were the most recent nationally aspiring people. They're relying upon their universally accepted history to move there and for peace and for their own safety. From then on, throughout the years until 1948, they were the most recognizable national entity because the Palestinians had not yet claimed the term Palestinian until the World War I. This is further exacerbated and proven by the Faisal Weitzman papers, which were said between Prince Faisal and Chaim Weitzman, saying, even if the whole of Arabia were to be made into an Arab land, we'll still give over the land of Israel because that is the Jewish property and for peace.
Wait, hold on a second. How is it just because a Jew and an Arab happen to agree to this? How did this become Jewish land? That's my original question. How is this a Jewish land?
I'm trying to avoid using historical or religious arguments. I'm trying to rely only on modern.
Wait, no, hold on a second. The whole thing comes down to historical.
If I were to make an argument based off religion, then if someone doesn't believe in the Quran, someone doesn't believe in the Torah, then it doesn't mean anything to them.
No, we don't have to go through the Torah. I obviously, as a Torah believing Jew and Torah observant Jew, I like the Torah, 100%. I go with the Torah's argument. God told the Jewish people this is going to be your land. Great. Okay. So, but now, right, the Arabs are going to claim the exact same thing, right? So my belief is that yes, 100% this is Jewish land. Arabs are going to claim it's their land. So I'm asking, so how do we prove that this is our land? What's our connection to this land?
If we were to just say like we found all these historical items in the land, cool, that's fun. Then it would come down. Then the argument would basically come down to saying the Jews are the equivalent, like the Native Americans. We're not going to give the entire America back to the Native Americans. Why should we give back Israel to Jews?
Well, maybe Jews weren't there. I said, what's the thought that we would give it back to the Jews?
Can you read the question?
What's the thought that you would give it back to Jews?
Well, like the argument would be like, throughout the years, if you don't look at the religion, we see all these historical items and historical presence of the Jews in the land of Israel/Palestine. And because of that, the Jews are not coming back to the land. We should give it back to them. If you're making that argument, you could say anything for any indigenous people that no longer have power over their land. We're going to say like, okay, now every country should convert back to their original ownership.
Yeah, I think that is a pretty strong argument. To say that people should have a right to go back. I think that's a very good thing that people should have a right to go back to their land. But my question is like this: Romans lived here. The Ottomans lived here. Pagans lived here. A lot of people lived here. So how do Jews have a right to live here? Yeah, a lot of people lived here, 100%.
I mean, you could say even after like 2,000 years of exile, it was still, the land of Israel was still important to Jews. You know, you still heard it in prayers and like culture. And if it was that significant for so long, doesn't that mean there's a connection?
Oh, okay. So, I mean, yeah, true, right? 100%. But yes, 100%. There's an undoubtable connection. But my question is, why is our connection more important than anyone else's connection? Right? That's the heart of the argument. As I have Palestinian neighbors whose families have been here for hundreds upon hundreds of years. A fact. That is a fact. And now I come to their land, right? My last name is Pilichowski. Okay, so it is not Pilichowski is literally, it means from the town of Pilich. Pilich is not in anywhere between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. It is in the middle of the heartland of Poland. Okay, so a Palestinian looks at me and says, hold on a second. You are a Polish immigrant to the United States who then moved to Israel because your armies defeated our armies, and the government that some of your people imposed on us allowed you to come back. My relatives in America cannot come back. And not only that, I am governed by your people now. Your army checks me when I want to go somewhere and doesn't allow me to go to certain places.
I mean, I think the argument here is that our claim is not more legitimate than the Palestinian claim, and we're not necessarily trying to say that it is, but we do have a claim, and so do they. And with the state of Israel, that's legitimizing our claim. And although the Palestinians' claim has not been legitimized, they don't have a state.
They don't have a state because what I'm saying is they're going to say, wait a minute, hold on a second. If you say Palestinians have the same rights as us, so then where's the Palestinian state?
Well, they're working on it.
Well, it's been 75 years that we've had a state, 74 years that we've had a state, and they don't have a state, right? So you could say, oh, well, they turned down a state, right? They turned down the offer of a state. That's their fault, right? But let me ask you this question. Why should we get Jaffa when Jaffa is half Arab?
For the same reason that they have Hebron, you've got to make compromises.
So, okay, they don't want to compromise, right? And by the way, you should know, I don't want to give up Hebron, right? Like, I don't want to give up the cave of the patriarchs, the Marat Machpelah. Right? I'm not willing to give that up. Are you willing to give up the Temple Mount and never go to the Kotel again? That's what they claim. They want East Jerusalem. So are you willing to walk away from the Kotel? Like we didn't have the Kotel from 1948 to 1967. Right? That was 19 years and no Jew was allowed to go there. So don't think like, okay, look, we won't be able to run the place, but we'll be able to visit. Not a chance. We were not allowed to visit. Okay? Track record. We are not going to be allowed to visit. So don't think for a second. Right, so you're giving away the old city. My house also, just so you know, right, where I live, it'd be given away. So, right, so compromise is very nice. They're not willing to compromise. So is that the only reason why we're not? Right. So let me help out here a little. Okay, we believe, and I'll you know what, I'll do it right now so you guys can have it. Here we go. Hold on, let me give it to you here. This is something that I wrote for my students in a class, okay? We believe that we are the indigenous people of this land. And as much as Shlomi might disagree with the idea that indigenous people should have a right to the land, okay? But the way the world works is one of two ways, okay? Either indigenous people get a right to their own land, right? That's one way you can look at it. Or if you say, like, listen, no, we're not doing that because that would require all of you to move out of your houses, because the Native Americans would come in, right? And the United States Congress is not about to advocate themselves to a bunch of Native Americans, right? We've just gotten around to changing the name of the Cleveland Indians and the Washington Redskins, okay? That took 200 and something years to the point where we've got, right? And we handed them a casino with a guitar in it, okay? So that's like, that's our big move for the United States of America, okay? So you can look at it that either the indigenous people get the land or the strongest are the ones that get the land, right? Those are the two ways of going, right? That's the way the world works today. Nowadays, either we've given land back to the indigenous people, right? Like the British left India, the British left Pakistan and created a state there, right, for the indigenous people. Or you have areas like Crimea and Russia where the Ukrainians were in charge and the Russians came in because they're stronger and they're there now, right? That's one of two ways. Either one of those ways, the Jews have a right to the land of Israel, okay? If you go by, which I think is incorrect, in my personal opinion, the strongest get the land. So then we have the land because we're in charge, we're strong. You want to get us off? Go ahead, try. You've tried 9 times and it's failed every single time. But you can go ahead and keep trying. Okay, that's way number one. Way number two, which I think is more accurate, is we are the indigenous people of this land. We have a history here that does not start in 1948. It doesn't start in 1857, in 1897 at the first Zionist Congress. It goes back to we are the indigenous people. This is our land. Now, it's true, Palestinians were here for hundreds upon hundreds of years, right? My Arab neighbors are here, and I'm not denying that. But that doesn't give them a claim to the land. Just because you were here for a long time doesn't mean now that all of a sudden you get to claim that you're indigenous and this is your land, right? Because it's all a matter of when does the clock start, right? They're saying that, look, yes, it's true. Jews were here. Like Shlomi brought up all the archaeological evidence that Jews were here thousands of years ago, right? So their argument is, yes, it's true. You were here thousands of years ago. So were the Romans, so were the Ottomans, so were the Greeks at one point, right? A lot of people were here for many, many hundreds of years. That doesn't mean that they should come back, right? That's their argument. But we should come back, right? Because we've been here, right? So it's only a question for Palestinians. It's this random time where they start the historical clock. They point to a random time in history. Coincidentally, it's the time that they immigrated from Arabia into Palestine, right? Because that's Arabs are from Arabia. They're not indigenous to this land. But they say that from that point on, that's where the clock restarts. And that's where we become the people that deserve this land. So we look at it and say, listen, no, this is our land. We have a stronger claim than you, which is why we're here and why we have our own state, because we're indigenous here. Now, the question becomes, now that they are here, what should we as the Jews do? So some people, right, they're thankfully the minority, will say, okay, that's it. Now you have to leave. The Jews are back. We're taking back our land. And sorry, you're out of here. That's not how the state of Israel believes. It's not how Jews act, right? Again, there are always extremists that feel things, but that's not what we do. We have 2 million Arab citizens of Israel that have the exact same rights I do, right? They don't have anything less than I do according to the law, right? By the way, you go to any hospital today in Israel, you're bound to meet Arab doctors, right? And a lot of them, Arabs like going into medicine. It's very hard to find a pharmacist in Israel that's not Arab, okay? Lawyers, Supreme Court justices, okay? The Supreme Court justice that put Moshe Katsav, the president of Israel, in jail, right? That decreed his sentence was an Arab judge. An Arab judge put a Jewish Israeli president in jail, right? That's our apartheid racist state, right? So you have, right? So Arabs are allowed to rise to the highest sectors, no question, right? It's not allowed; they're citizens, just like I'm allowed to, right? Same exact thing. So we're not saying that Jews, because we're indigenous and we have a right to this land, it's a unique right to this land, and we're the only ones that have a right to the land. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that we have a right to the land, which is why we, and not you, get to govern this land. That's our position, okay? So we get to govern this land. This land becomes a Jewish state because, and here's the key, everybody listen to this very carefully, Jewish people are not a religion, right? In the classic sense of how the world understands, we're a people. We consider ourselves the nation of Israel, right? And the Israelis have come back to their land. The French have France, Spanish have Spain, Germans have Germany, Filipinos have the Philippines, right? Chinese have China. The Jews, who are really, that's just another name. Where does Jews come from? That's not a name you find in the Bible, right? Where does the word Jews come from? From Judea. That's what this land was. This land was Judea, right? Before we were called Jews, what were we called? Israelites, right? Because we're from the land of Israel. So the Israelites have returned. We've returned to our land. And like every other people, we get a land. That's what happens, right? If you're from a land, you get a land. And that's what we are. We're from a land, so we get a land. So we have the rights to this land because that's who we are. That's what we are. We are the people of the land, okay? So that's why we have the right to a Jewish state, where we have the right to govern, and why if somebody comes to you, and here we go, this is the big thing. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, just make this America, run a democracy the same way. Everybody gets to become an American, right? It doesn't make a difference where you're from. You can become an American, right? You can apply to be an American. You can be an immigrant from somewhere else, and you can apply to become an American. So let's make Israel like that, or let's make this land like that, where everybody can become a citizen of this no name, no country. So no, because you can't take the land away from the Israelites, right? You can't just take the land away from the Israelites because it's convenient. Because like Jordan, like you say, like, we might get compromise, right? That way nobody will kill each other anymore. Because no, but why should I have to give up my land? Why should my people have to give up my land? It's my land, right? Why should I have to give that up just so that you say, just to give in essentially to your blackmail, right? What's happening now? We're being blackmailed. Give up your land or we're going to continue terrorism. We're going to continue wars. So no, instead what we're going to do is we're going to build up our security apparatus to such an extent where you're no longer threatening to us, right? That's the idea, right? It's the same thing you would want from any country in the world. If you were threatened, you would not want your country to give in. You would want your country to protect you, right? From threatening elements, okay? So that's the idea. Now, by the way, if the citizens of the country elect people in who say, no, it's actually smarter to compromise, then that's our prerogative. We can do that, right? But we can't be forced to do that, right? That we can't be forced to do that. But we're a democracy. So if we vote leaders in and the leaders decide, like Ariel Sharon decided, to give in, okay, so then that's what happens. Okay, Shlomi, what would you like to say?
If we were to make this argument to an American, they'll be like, no, I don't respond to this. I'm not going to give up my land back to Native Americans. And it's the same point. Indigenous people, sure, but if you give them indigenous people a right to govern their land, then much of the world's countries and borders would immediately be thrown out and cause the world to destroy. Why would we make an exception just for this land of Israel, just for the Jews?
So then why do Americans get? I ask you guys this: why do Americans get to rule America? Why do they get to rule that land? If you're not indigenous, what gave you the right to rule over Native Americans?
We came here, we settled here, and we conquered the land. I'm not saying it's legitimate, but it's just what happened.
Okay, so you conquered it. I'm saying, so you're saying if you conquer people, you get the rights. Sarah, what do you say?
I was gonna say that, like, I guess we don't really have the right to, like, govern if you're thinking about the point of view that, like, the indigenous should be the one governing the land. But I think it's more that, like, we had more force, so we were able to conquer it.
Okay, so my question is, right, then if you go with that argument that it's all about force, then we're still there, right? When Palestinians tell me, and they flip the argument around and say, no, we're the ones that are here longer than you, right? And therefore we get the rights to land. So I say, okay, man, tell me how long I have to stay here and rule over you until I get to say the same argument, right? As I tell Palestinians, like, the whole that argument's ridiculous, right? That you're here longer. And if you say that it's by force, and that's what rules, which is the argument that Shlomi's saying most Americans are going to respect, right? That it's all about force. And since we came here and we settled and we conquered, we get, the American Congress and, gets to rule it. Okay, fine. So then we're the ones in power in Israel. Also, right? That's we have the strongest army, strongest military, right? That's what it comes down to. Yeah, that's the idea. But we don't have that. I think we have the morally sound argument, which is that we're the indigenous people, right? We were thrown off our land. We didn't leave. We didn't decide to leave. We were thrown off our land by enemies. We were prevented from coming back by many enemies. And then at a certain point, we became politically astute enough and became active enough to make our way back. And then we established a state on the way back, right? Okay, that now you're talking about now you're talking that's our right. It's a moral argument to make, and it's not something that we it's not something that we it's not something that we can that we have to be ashamed of. That's something that we can say, makes perfect sense, right? And it's logical and moral and everything else, right? That's the idea. Any questions on that? It's a heavy topic, right? It's not just current events. It's like I want to take you guys a little deeper, right? That to understand things. Okay. So any questions on that?
In that mindset, would the goal be to have a complete Jewish state from the Jordan to the Mediterranean, with the Arabs or Palestinians as an active minority that has equal rights?
So that seems to the question is, when you say is the goal, right? You're assuming something which makes perfect sense, but just happens to be not accurate. Okay. What makes perfect sense is if we would have a national goal, right? We should have a national goal. That makes perfect sense, except we don't. It's a democracy, so everybody has different opinions. So there is no goal, right? Because if you ask me the goal, I'm going to tell you one thing. If you ask another Israeli in Tel Aviv, they're going to have a different answer, right? And there is no is like Israel aspiration that you can point to and say this is the Israeli goal, right? Even before there was a state, when Zionists would get together, they would disagree as to what we should be. Well, what should our state look like, right? That was a disagreement. And not only that was that a disagreement, but there was a time where people contemplated either Argentina or Uganda being a state. So even to that extent, there was a disagreement. Forget about the borders of Israel. The question was, is Israel the place, right? That was also a disagreement. So Jordan, I think it's one of the greatest things of Israel is that there is nothing set in stone other than the fact that this is a Jewish state, right? Everything else is up for discussion, right? We're willing to entertain all notions, and there are different opinions across the board. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, let's quickly go to Iran. Okay, so Iran is Iran is continuously moving forward on their nuclear weapons program. What they claim is a peaceful program, even though they're purifying uranium past the point of any use other than weapons, and they're getting to a point where this is what the world's fear is, that they don't have a nuclear weapon, but they are just to the point where they could be weeks away from having a nuclear weapon. If they get to that point, and then they stop. And at any moment, they could turn on the machines and say, go for it, and they're 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. And then every single person, every other country in the world has 2 weeks to try to stop them if they know when that decision was made, right? So what we're trying to do in Israel is we're trying to make sure they cannot get to that point. They can't get to the point where they're a couple of weeks away from the ability to break out into a nuclear weapons country, right? America is having a little more patience because they're saying, well, they're not there yet, right? We're saying we're not even going to let them get close to that point. And America's very worried, as President Obama was worried, that Israel at some point will just do a middle of the night raid and take out their nuclear facilities and start a massive war, while America believes in diplomacy. And America believes that if we just talk to them, we can convince them. This is the everlasting hope of diplomats, which is that everybody's rational, everybody is thinking about the best for for what could happen, and that's just not true. It's not true that everybody's rational. It's not true that everybody's thinking what's the best for the world, right? That's not necessarily true. There are evil people out there. I firmly believe that the Iranian leadership, the Islamic fanatical state, is not rational, is not good, is not fundamentally good, and does not fundamentally think about the best things. I think that they are evil, and they will do evil things. And the moment we forget that there is evil in the world, and we think that diplomacy can solve everything, that's the moment where we're going to be unfortunately surprised with a very bitter ending. That's what we right. It's what Chamberlain felt. That Chamberlain was the Prime Minister of England and signed a peace treaty with Hitler, which Hitler violated pretty quickly, because he felt that, like, okay, everybody's good, right? So yeah, a lot of times you can take evil people and they can do good, but a lot of times evil people are just evil and they're tricking you, and diplomacy is a way of stalling, and right, and that's and it's very hard for me and many other people, this is where Israel's position is, to believe that Iran is actually going to stop their nefarious activities. No, they are nefarious, they are evil. So that's what's happening right now, and America is about to start negotiating with Iran again. And a lot of people are saying this is crazy that we're even doing this, right? While America, for the first time under the Biden administration, is starting to sound the alarm of, if they don't start cooperating soon, meaning if Iran doesn't start cooperating soon, we're going to have to look at other actions. There's going to have to be other steps that we take. It's not going to be enough to go ahead and just simply say that we're just going to keep talking to them and eventually reach a deal. At some point, military action is going to have to be taken. So that's where Iran's holding now. Where this comes to an end, everybody has their own deadlines, right? Israel, there's no doubt in my mind that Israel has a deadline. That if something does, it might not be a date deadline, it might be an event dateline, right? It might be if X happens, then we attack. But there's no doubt in my mind that there is a finite amount of patience that certain countries are going to have with Iran. Okay, whether we get to that point or not, right? Iran has incredible patience. So Iran might say, listen, let's not even get to that point. We're not ready to use a nuclear weapon, right? But I think that Iran also, in its calculations, looks around at what's happened to other world leaders and says, okay, other world leaders the world leaders that are still world leaders over the last 20 decades are those with a nuclear weapon. World leaders that did not develop a nuclear weapon are no longer alive. North Korea's leaders are still alive. Muammar Gaddafi, who gave up his nuclear weapons program, not alive, right? So that's the right. Assad in Syria still alive, but lost his entire country. No nuclear weapon. Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, no nuclear weapon, deposed, right? Just look around the Arab world and you look at that and you say, okay, this is who lasts and this is who doesn't last. The differentiating factor is who has a nuclear weapon. So if I'm Iran, I sit there and say the nuclear weapon is the guarantee that I have that I don't lose power, right? That's how we retain power. Okay, time for your questions. No questions. Wow. Okay. Okay, so we have no questions. We have no questions. I still reserve the right next week to cancel class for Hanukkah, but just like this class is on Hanukkah. I know for you guys it's not Hanukkah, but for me it's Hanukkah. So and I had class. I assume that next week I'll also have class, but just in case, just so you know, might not. Okay.